Welcome, welcome, welcome back. Lovely people, it's 3 o'clock. I hope you've had a coffee or a tea and a cheeky little bliss ball, which I must confess was a tasty little treat at this time of day. Thank you all. Let's throw all this knowledge, all these enormous brains that we've been having a peek into over the course of the first part of this symposium. We're going to throw them all together in a bear pit. This is where things get really interesting. We're going to throw them all into the white sofaed bear pit, and they're going to enter into all sorts of conversation around a lot of really key points that have been raised as a result of the information and the research and data that we've managed to hear from today. Now, our group, our Kiwifruit Brains Trust, comprises already of some familiar faces that you've heard from today, but I would like to welcome a few additional faces who are going to join us for our roundtable discussion. It's a privilege to have them here, both of them in New Zealand. The first, Professor David Richardson, our visiting professor from the University of Reading in the United Kingdom. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. Thank you. In addition, Basil Mathioudakis, the former head of unit of the Directorate General on Health of the European Commission, based in Belgium. Basil, thank you so much for coming down to New Zealand, and welcome to the stage. We'll also be joined by three other men we've heard from today. Professor Giovanni from Italy, from the University of Bologna, please come to the stage. Professor Shin Fukudo from Japan, we'd love to have you up here as well, Professor, thank you. And finally, and certainly not least, Professor Richard Gearry from the wonderful University of Otago, right here in New Zealand. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Now, we have heard a lot of very in-depth scientific information, and there will be lots of big brains in this room who will have absorbed every single symbol and every single word and every single graph, and there'll be others that will need some clarification on a few things, and myself included. And I thought we'd kick things off at that level, because ultimately we're hearing amazing things about kiwifruit. What I want to know is what that actually fundamentally means for the consumer, and how that information gets transmitted. So I'm going to keep it pretty simple to start, and I'm going to direct this, I think I will direct it at Dr. Richardson, if you don't mind, and welcome, and Richard, if you wouldn't mind weighing in on this as well. How important, what happens if healthy people consume kiwifruit daily? It's a specific question, but how important is it? What happens if healthy people consume kiwifruit daily?
Well, I think that we've heard a lot of the scientific terminology, and one of the issues always is how you can communicate what these benefits are to in the EU, the average consumer. The research that we've done in the EU and in the United Kingdom shows that consumers really are very interested in health claims and messages about nutritional benefits. But the problem is that they often dislike the scientifically orientated wording that we've all talked about this morning. It's quite a difficult balance between consumer understanding and the scientific wording that we've been using. And I can just reflect on some of the claims that have been approved in the European Union so far. They're not exactly the most consumer-friendly wordings at all. They talk about, and I'm just going to read some of these because they're quite interesting, maintenance of normal defecation, reducing intestinal discomfort, improvement of bowel function, and maintenance of normal bowel function. Well, the average consumer would probably be quite disconcerted by many of the terminologies we've been using today. And in fact, I was rather pleased that the discussion on digestive health was after lunch rather than before. But there is as I've said, there's a balance, and it's often called the KISS approach. On the one hand, it's keeping it serious and scientific, and on the other, it's keeping it soft and sentimental. And it's this balance between the wording of the claims and the statements on pack that has become quite a challenge in several countries within the European Union. For example, we have a a provision for flexibility of the wording to get the messages about scientific benefits and health benefits across in consumer terminology. But in fact, the enforcement authorities and the regulators rather like to stick to the prescribed wordings of the claims, which are not entirely consumer friendly. And there's been huge discussions on how much flexibility you can have in the wording. What we are sure of, though, and I'm sure Richard will back it up, is that the statements and the claims have to reflect the scientific evidence. And it's really, and the confidence that consumers have in the quality and nature of the scientific support for the claims is crucial in terms of their acceptance. Just one other point is consumers take a long time to get used to particular wordings. I remember when probiotics were first introduced into the United Kingdom, this is 10 or 15 years ago, it was incredibly difficult to talk about bad bacteria. In England, people just didn't like to know about bacteria. And friendly bacteria was a way of communicating the message. The word probiotic became understandable. But then, of course, we had a slight problem with the European Food Safety Authority and with the Commission about the use of the word probiotic. But any kind of wording to communicate the benefits of digestive health really do remain a bit of a challenge, to say the least. The words that I've seen so far in terms of digestive comfort, I think those are entirely sensible. And in the EU, they have one of the physiological benefits which they consider to be good is about reduction of intestinal discomfort. So you've put a positive spin on it, which I think is much more appropriate.
Thank you. Richard, if you could weigh in a little bit on this, and it was interesting in one of the graphs that we saw in the presentations. People are aware that diet is the cause of these things, whatever it might be, their discomfort or their health issues. So health claims are obviously going to have a high impact on consumers, and how do we manage that?
Yes, I think this area is very interesting because unlike other areas, from a regulatory point of view, the regulators have said use these two groups of participants in a study who have symptoms and are symptomatic, whereas many other claims, from what I understand, are made the studies are done in the general population. So automatically that involves illness, and I know that when you're making a health claim around a food, really that's around wellness. And so this is a trickier area, I believe, because of that, and we've discussed this before. From my point of view as a doctor, it's a lot easier for me to talk about people with symptoms and people with illnesses because we have ways of measuring that. And I think one of the benefits of the regulators in this area is they have actually set very clearly the sorts of questionnaires and the sorts of measurements and markers that need to be used in the studies to show that there's an effect. But of course, if you're a person in the community who doesn't have any symptoms, maybe you're in the minority, as Giovanni mentioned before, the question really for you is, what does this do for me? But we've been told by the regulators that actually this is a valid way to extrapolate from people with minor gastrointestinal symptoms to extrapolate those data into the general population. So my feeling is that as a doctor with a patient in front of me, I feel as though I can say from the studies that we have that Kiwifruit may help increase the frequency of complete spontaneous bowel motions if they have constipation or IBS with constipation, but that's something that could be tried. As far as how that is communicated more widely to the general population, we need to be very careful about that. And I think that the aspects that Professor Richardson's discussed are important in making sure that what we say doesn't undersell or oversell the science. It's that communication to the public that has to be at a level that is widely understood, but also reflects the science. And that's why I think the Zespri approach to this has been so important, by having hard science to back it up and then move forward from there.
Thanks. Richard, Basil, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes. As a regulator for 33 years, I want to clarify that the wording, or let's say flexibility on the wording, is enshrined in the law, and therefore you have to apply it. But the regulators that you mentioned about accepting this or the other wording, in fact, were not the risk managers, but they were the risk assessors. That is, the European Food Safety Authority, in a risk analysis-based food legislation, are the risk assessors, and the regulators, that is the European Commission and the member states, are the risk managers. It is difficult for the risk manager to change very much the wording once you have the risk assessors telling you that this is the wording that reflects the science. And we had extensive discussions with the interested stakeholders, in particular the researchers and the food industry, to say, don't put a scientific wording for approval, because deviating from that afterwards, it will be difficult for the risk manager. So I think this should be kept in mind both by the research people and also by the food industry. But as to what the consumer gets from, particularly from the label, because there is quite a lot of discussion, I think we have to look a little bit more into some fundamental considerations regarding the label and the relationship of the consumer with the label. I think the general feeling is that the consumer is not looking very much into the label, and there is very interesting information there. There is the list of ingredients, there is nutrition labeling, there are claims. And yet, the consumer does not pay great attention. As it was already mentioned in the morning by Professor Seidel, the prime considerations of the consumer is price, taste, convenience, and then nutritional considerations come down to 4th, 5th place. Add to that the consumer doesn't have very much time. So the consumer has to be motivated to look into the label. And this is not the case today. Then, when you ask consumers about wanting more information, they say yes, and this is the position of their representative organizations. But when you go into how much they understand, how much it affects their purchasing behavior, and how much that affects the consumption behavior, it is really, it leaves a lot to be desired. So I think the consumers' associations want more information. Industry is resisting because, of course, this is costly. We had long debates in the European Union about making nutrition labeling mandatory, regulating claims in the way that we regulate them through prior authorization, etc., etc. So I believe that it is a fundamental question to find ways to increase motivation for consumer to look into the label, and from there on to find ways that you convey the message in the best way that it is understood and used by the consumer, because I think this is the problem, how to read the information, understand it, and then transform it into desirable action.
You've led into my next question and partially answered it, but marketing communications are closely policed in so many countries, and rightly so. And in some places, it's illegal to print health claims on packaging without the correct approval from government bodies. And I'm just wanting to get for a sense from you, Basil, and possibly you, Professor Richardson, is this good for the consumers, this level of policing?
The whole basis, of course, of the legislation was for consumer protection. And at that time, before the legislation came in, there were a number of false and misleading claims. And I think that the consumer has benefited overall by the removal of all these spurious and misleading and false claims. There's no doubt about that. So that when you look at the claims on foods and food supplements in the European Union now, they must be on an authorized list. And when they're on the register of approved claims, the consumer and those that are interested in the subject know that those claims have been assessed by the European Food Safety Authority, a scientific panel, that they've been very strict in their approach to the assessment of the science, and that they have the confidence that those claims are bona fide. So I think that the consumer has really benefited very considerably. I think the industry has also benefited because the claims that are out there are genuine. It's created a level playing field, but it's also stimulated a lot of activity within the food industry to make sure that the studies that they carry out to look at the benefits of particular foods and food components those studies are well designed, they're well executed, and that they're going to be taken into account in such a way that they're better than many of the papers that have been published in the past. I think one of the problems that we've had in nutrition science is that many papers were published in peer-reviewed journals, but when you actually come to scrutinize them in some considerable detail, many of them didn't stand up to that level of scrutiny. So overall, I would say that the consumers have benefited significantly. I think that the food industry has benefited, and academic research has also benefited in the sense that they're taking much more care and attention about the kinds of studies that they perform.
I would fully support this analysis. I wanted to add that the harmonization of claims in the European Union was spurred by, of course, the consideration of allowing the free circulation of goods within the market of 500 million people that we have. So this was a primary consideration, but then, of course, both industry and consumers wanted the claims to be regulated because, as David said, we had some wild claims that were made, not so much by the serious industry, but nevertheless, funny things were being communicated to the consumer. The consumer was confused, and it was losing faith, which is very important. It was losing faith in this communication relating to nutritional aspects on the label that, of course, neither the consumers wanted, nor the authorities wanted, nor the serious industry. So I think overall it was a benefit, as David said, not only for the consumers, but also for the industry, because you cut out the cowboys, the wild statements. Statements. I would admit that nobody expected, or the vast majority of the stakeholders did not expect such, I would call it, severe application of the high level of substantiation as it is applied by the European Food Safety Authority. But I think eventually getting more and more experience from what is coming out, we believe that the evaluation is based on a good track.
Can I just make one additional, you reminded me. The legislation in the EU, it covers not just labels on packs, it covers all commercial communications. So it covers the labels, advertising, point of sale material, even the material you have on your websites. It has to be consistent and comply with the regulation. Because at one point, people would put in their advertising degrees of flexibility which exceeded what the law would have approved. But now it's pretty much tightened up.
Can I make a comment on terminology? Because I think that terminology is very important, and I think that the difficulties in the terminology is related to a general lack of knowledge. So we talk about dyspepsia, discomfort, and this terminology is very difficult to be received from the general public. I think that there is a lot of work that us as clinicians and scientists need to do to better understand the field. And one day probably we will replace these difficult words with a more simple word that reflects what is really going on in the human body for that particular disease. So I think that the terminology is difficult because of lack of knowledge. And when we talk about terminology, we also should consider that my language is not English, is Italian. His language is Japanese, and in our cultures, some words, when we go global, are completely different. So discomfort does not find an exact counterpart in Spanish or in Indian or in Italian. So when we go global, I think that we should also consider these difficulties. So terminology is a crucial point in this discussion. It is a crucial point when we translate what we as scientists find in our research into a public type of message. So I think that this is very, very important.
Let me add something about terminology and concept of the disease. We belong to the Roma Foundation, Roma Committee, and we are going to develop exactly the same questionnaire among the different countries, and we will survey the reality of functional gastrointestinal disorders around the world, simultaneously, to what is the impact of the diet or culture or economy or something like that. Yeah, it's probably very soon such a kind of project will happen.
I mean, a comment I'd make about the food regulation that's been discussed so far that I'm really excited about is that if you have a drug that you create, it's a very, very strict protocol that you need to go through from phase 1 to phase 3 to show efficacy and everything else that's going on. And the claim and the indication that a drug has is worded very carefully to reflect what's gone on in the studies. And to me, that's appropriate. It's the right thing to do. It protects patients, it protects the general population and everyone. And to me, I think that a similar sort of regulation of some sort, not the same, but a stringent regulation is needed if people are going to make claims about anything that's good for health. It's important. Food isn't a drug. Food and drug are different, but I think that there has to be some structure around that, which is why I think that the framework that's there now is useful, particularly in Europe, for that.
Won't agree with what I'm going to say, but there was a considerable amount of debate within the European Union because the industry in particular felt that the criteria that were being applied by the European Food Safety Authority in the assessment of claims was too pharmaceutical. It was aimed at conclusive evidence of cause and effect, and that with a drug there is a much more specific effect than with a nutrient or a food, which is in the wider context of diet and all sorts of ramifications. Nutrients have roles to play in several functions within the body. But in fact, I think the industry and academia now have come round to the appreciation of the so-called hierarchy of studies, where you have human intervention studies right at the top of the hierarchy. Epidemiological studies are sort of next in line. Things like in vitro studies, rat studies, and other studies of that nature and mechanistic studies are recognized as supporting evidence. But basically, the EFSA requires human intervention studies, really, for the successful outcome of a health claim. In the actual law itself, it refers to the assessment of the totality of the available data and weighing of the evidence. And again, there's been considerable controversy about how you define what the totality of the available data is and whether there should be so much emphasis on human intervention studies. But that debate's gone on, but at the moment, that hierarchy of studies more or less parallels what the assessments of drugs are, and that's the status quo. I think that in other legislative jurisdictions, they have made provision for qualified health claims, where the evidence is not conclusive, but it might be very, very promising indeed. I think the United States is slightly more flexible in that approach. But EFSA has decided to take that strict approach, and that's where we are at the moment.
If I can say, there was a long debate about that, and we were aware of how the US was tackling the subject. On the other hand, I must say, with my contacts, I had realized that although the authorities might have wished to change approach, the lobbying was too strong and prevented any change. And I think to a large extent it remains the case in the United States. But we made a differentiation in the legislation relating to information that would go on the label advertising of presentation, and therefore it was directed directly to the consumer, and information that would be, of course, part of scientific publications, or even that it would be conveyed to so-called health professionals, whether they were doctors, dietitians, or other health professionals. And there such information, although you might hear some debate about that also, it is accepted that information that you provide to health professionals, as long as it is for them and does not find way on leaflets that would be left, let's say, in the waiting room of the doctor and therefore accessed easily by the consumer, then they are not falling under the strict provisions of the regulation. So there it is something that there is a differentiation which is notable for the European Union.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll have a little bit of a side topic. It's not a side topic, but it's a bit of a segue. We've had a lot of conversation about different kinds of diets in the context of our presentations today. And I'm going to sort of move a little bit more into the microbiota area. And Professor Fukudo, I'm going to bring you in on this. And we've talked about the low FODMAP. Now, I've never heard of this as your standard consumer. I was fascinated by it. And I want to talk about kiwifruit, the kiwifruit nutrient in the context of a low FODMAP diet, and I'm wondering if you could address that question for me.
Shall I say about nutrient and brain-gut interactions? It's a very important issue because brain-gut functions may determine our emotion actually, because some part of the limbic brain, like amygdala and hypothalamus, or some brain, important part to control our emotion, is greatly regulated by the visceral organs. It's a gut. So the signal from the gut may contribute our, emotional formation. So it's a very crucial issue. And the recent advances in microbiology clarify that several, substances like valproate or valproate-like substance may be produced by the gut microbiota. As you know, the valproate is, just, sedate our brain and control the calm emotion. So such a kinds of interaction may be clarified recently. So it's very important to how we produce a nice gut microbiota may contribute the whole health in the human being. So anyway, the evidence is not so many at this moment, but there are some evidence. For example, the intervention using the probiotics may inhibit the negative emotional formation when the subject is seeing the negative emotional pictures. So such kinds of studies probably it's more important in the very near future to find the brain-gut interactions and food and the microbiota or some other materials.
Professor Barbara, have you got anything to add to that? One of the other conversations here is how we can keep our microbiota healthy, in particular relation to IBS. If you could extrapolate further on that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I think that we have learned in the past 15, 20 years since the introduction of the new technologies to study the microbiota and our obvious increase in the knowledge about the microbiota, we have learned that the microbiota is important not only for the intestine but also for many other functions in the body. The brain is one of these examples, but also the cardiovascular system, the metabolism and liver function and so on. So we have learned also that keeping a healthy microbiota is very important to prevent a series of different diseases. So having said that, we need to know how to keep our microbiota healthy. And there are, I think, several ways we can do that. One is to use our diet as one of the major forces leading the growth of beneficial bacteria in the gut. So by giving the good substrates to this microbiota to grow and to produce substances that are important for our health is crucial to maintain a good health. And fibers in particular are those substances in our diet that skip most of the digestion in the small bowel, reach the colon where most of the bacteria are, and elicit the growth of the beneficial bacteria. So diet is the first, I think, element that we should keep in mind in order to maintain a good and healthy microbiota. The second option is to use beneficial bacteria, namely probiotics, in order to modify the environment and not only giving good bacteria but also stimulating other bacteria to behave in a good way. The third option is to avoid to use medications that in a way can disrupt or in other ways reduce the diversity of the microbiota. I'm talking about antibiotics. So there is a widespread use nowadays of antibiotics for many different reasons, and in most of these cases they could be avoidable. So I think that this is important to know that by the overuse of antibiotics we could induce a number of different diseases, not only in the gut, but also outside the gut, in the brain, in the cardiovascular system, etc., etc. So I think that these are the three main points we could work on in order to maintain a healthy microbiota.
Just bringing it back to the consumer again, and from perhaps my perspective, is those messages getting through to the consumer? The message about antibiotics, I feel, is slowly sifting through, and diet as well. Do you feel those messages are finally being communicated to the consumer?
Yeah, I think that the consumer need to be certainly instructed how to use food, how to modify their diet in order to have a good and healthy diet, in order to stimulate these physiological responses in the gut and in the microbiota. So I think that education is very important at different levels, starting from the public and going up to those that are involved also in the study of the human body. So I think that we could do a lot in the future in order to improve our knowledge and to transmit to the public these good behaviors.
I think one of the difficult things when it comes to antibiotic use is, of course, expectation and perception. And if many of you in the audience will know, if you have a sick child and take them to the doctor, you want something done. And being told that you're not having antibiotics for something that you think needs antibiotics is a very difficult thing sometimes for you as a parent to accept, but also it's a lot easier sometimes for the doctor to write a prescription for antibiotics than it is to have an argument as to why that shouldn't be done. So I think that antibiotics is an essential thing that we must reduce in our population, the exposure that we're getting, and there's good data coming out now that it increases the risk of inflammatory bowel disease, antibiotic use, and other diseases as well. But of course, that isn't as immediate as the sick person in front of you. So I think it's a real culture shift, this change in antibiotic use that we need to work with.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that if we tell the people that the use of antibiotic not only is useless in certain conditions, but can harm their child, then I think that this is the good message that we can give to these people.
It's a very motivating message, I would argue, as a parent as well. It's all very well to say this may or may not work. If you said it would actually do harm, I think it would have a fairly massive impact. That's a big message to have to give a parent. Just moving slightly, and perhaps Professor Gearry, you could answer this. Why our intestine needs fibres? A little bit of chat about motility and the growth of beneficial bacteria.
Sure. So in fibre is really the food for the colonocytes. So we've heard a lot about the bacteria that live in the large intestine. And one of the things that always amazed me at medical school was I was told that only a small proportion of the nutrition that the colonocyte or the cells that line the colon get actually comes from the blood supply. A large amount of energy that the colonocytes need come from within the colon, and fibre provides the substrate for that, for the microbiota to work on and to produce these short chain fatty acids such as butyrate and things. So to me, fibre is an important part of what's going on in that, but it's part of a balance as well. You can't go too far with fibre. It's got to be the right sort of fibre as well, as Giovanni mentioned earlier. Not all fibres are equal. They will have different effects on the bowel and work in different ways. And I was intrigued by the data he showed with the mechanism where butyrate and things that are being produced within the lumen of the colon can have an effect on receptors in the gut wall that will change the motility of the gut. So here we have fibre in the diet having a direct effect mediated through the enteric nervous system, the little brain, as he put it, which I thought was a great comment. I always tell my neurology colleagues that there are more nerves in the gut than there are in the brain, and the gut's a much more important brain than the one up here. I'm slightly biased though, but certainly the understanding of the enteric nervous system, I think, is really just starting now, and I think we have two experts on the sofa with us today, which is fantastic. But showing how diet can interact with that nervous system to come up with therapies, I think, is really the way of the future.
Let me add one comment on bulk needs peristalsis needs a bulking agent. So the dietary fiber help the initiation of the peristalsis. So it's propagating motility from the stomach to the colon. So it's a very crucial issue to promote, so improve the constipation or some other dysfunctions of the gut. So as Giovanni presented today in the slides, enterochromaffin cell just receives the mechanical stimulation of the gut lumens, and everything starts from such a kind of stimulation from the gut lumen. So I usually educate the patient with constipation. Unless eating a food, you cannot see the defecation. So that's kind of knowledge, and such education is very important in the society.
Another quick question for you, Professor. Is there an effect of kiwifruit on the mucosal immune system? And I hope I've pronounced that correctly, forgive me if I haven't, on the mucosal immune system?
I think I mentioned an example during my presentation. I think that there is some evidence indicating that kiwifruit can stimulate the production of these beta defensin from the mucosa, which are the substances that regulate the growth of certain bacteria in the gut. So yes, there is evidence that kiwifruit can modulate the immune response. This could be either a direct effect of certain substances containing kiwifruit or an indirect effect through the microbiota. And just following up what it has been said before by Professor Fukudo regarding the interaction between the microbiota and the enteric nervous system, I think that this is very complex and it's bidirectional. The microbes that we have in our colon are friends and also enemies. So we need them because they help us to produce vitamins, absorb nutrients, and many other different functions that we discussed before. But we also want them to stay in their place in the lumen without having them invading the mucosa. So the mechanism that has been discussed before, the production of short-chain fatty acids by the microbiota is a mechanism of defense. So the short-chain fatty acids stimulate motility, and by this way, motility eliminates the bacteria in excess from the colon. So you see that the mechanism is bidirectional. On one hand, we have motility that stimulates propulsion and expulsion of bacteria, and on the other hand, we have bacteria that stimulate motility. So I think that there are many different examples how the bacteria interact with the physiology of the gut. They interact through the relationship with the enteric nervous system, via interaction with the epithelial cells, via stimulation of the immune system. One other brilliant evidence in order to show the effects of the microbiota on the immune system is the growth of germ-free animals. These animals don't have or have very limited evidence of immune cells in the mucosa. So this tells us that the microbes stimulate the growth of the immune system in the intestine, which is very important for many different aspects of the physiology of the gut. So there are many different interactions between fibers, the microbiota, and the physiology of the gut. And I think that stimulating in a good way these interactions is very important for keeping a healthy intestine.
Is there also potential benefit of kiwifruit on the upper GI function and symptoms? Is also another question I have. Perhaps Professor Fukudo, would you like to answer that one?
Actually, for example, the actinidine enhances, gastric motility and enhance gastric emptying, and also reduce symptoms of upper GI tract. So it's very beneficial to, improve. There is no study about trial or Kiwifruit for the patient with functional dyspepsia, but functional dyspepsia frequently accompanies with IBS, as you know. So it's worth to try to identify the beneficial effect quantitatively using GSRS or some other questionnaire to find the effect of Kiwifruit or some other foods on upper GI symptoms.
Thank you.
I mean, to me, I think there are a number of unanswered questions when it comes to the upper GI effect of Kiwifruit. I think that the actinidine story, I think, has got some really compelling data in animal models and in vitro. But my feeling is that it's a little bit more difficult sometimes to show a beneficial effect in human studies and interventions in this way. And I think that the next step really is to try and do those human studies if we can. I mean, interestingly, in the study I presented earlier, we did show some improvements in some upper GI symptoms using the GSRS, but I think I would take those with caution. We weren't set up to show that. That wasn't why we did the study. We measured those symptoms as part of a wider scale, and it's interesting, it's supportive, but it wasn't the primary outcome, and we didn't really design the study to show that. So to me, I would love the opportunity maybe to think about ways of seeing if Kiwifruit has a clinical effect, that we can translate the bench work that's been done so well at Ridditt and other institutes that suggests there's a real effect here. I would love to see some clinical data in humans that show that. And I think there's a really strong signal from what's been done at Ridditt, and that's begging to be answered.
Can I further comment on this? I think that there are evidences in the literature indicating that in chronic constipation and in IBS with constipation, if you improve bowel function, then as a reflex improve also gastric emptying. So there are reflexes in the intestine that are very important in the regulation of the upper GI function in patients with intestinal bowel problems. So I think that one mechanism could be related to the fact that if you increase laxation, then you improve also gastric emptying.
In your opinion, is it better to use diet or take medication if you have IBS?
I think whatever works best is the best answer. I mean, my experience is that people with IBS want results, but equally, I think we saw from the slides that Professor Barbara showed that many people associate benefit with diet more so than with drugs. But the beauty of medicine is that each person in front of you is an individual and is different, and some people will be highly motivated to follow diet. And indeed, my experience with low FODMAP diet, taught by a dietitian who's experienced at doing it, is that 75% of people will get a significant improvement in their symptoms, and then we reintroduce things to find the threshold. So in the right hands, a dietary intervention can be very effective. But then I have other patients who I know will not consider diet, not for 1 minute. And for those people, they want a quick, convenient, easy fix. And for those people, maybe a drug is better. So it's horses for courses, if you like. We need to pick the right treatment for the right person at the right time. And diet is one of those treatments that we can use. And certainly with regards to the low FODMAP aspects that have been mentioned today, Kiwifruit is a low FODMAP food. So for me, if people want to maintain fruit, it's about switching foods out, reintroducing foods in to maintain a balanced diet. But I can never do that myself. I don't have the skills to teach that. I have dietitians who are highly skilled individuals who can do that on a one-on-one consultation. And indeed, all the low FODMAP studies that suggest that low FODMAP diet is efficacious have all been taught one-to-one dietitian appointments. And that's a big resource, but it's how it appears to work.
I totally agree with you, and I believe that personalized medicine is much better than getting data from huge mega trials where the evidence is sometimes not totally applicable in your patients. So I think that we should compromise between the results of the data from the literature and what we are doing in everyday practice. And I think also that not all patients are the same, and we should use a sort of step-up approach. So in the general population, many subjects have functional GI symptoms, and probably in those that do not require the doctor, we could start from diet and probably stop there, and we probably don't need medications in that general type of patient. When we go up and symptoms get worse and worse, then we get to the very difficult patients. Then I think that we need a combination of dietary suggestions and medications. So I think that not all the patients are the same, and we need to do this type of step-up approach.
I'll just a very quick comment. And that was one of the key things from the data that we showed today, was that the severity of IBS symptoms in the cohort that we presented was at the lower limit of what we would expect. So if you have severe IBS with lots of symptoms and you're seeing lots of specialists, diet may play a small role, but it's not the answer. These results are more applicable to a wider, more general population of people with milder symptoms, as opposed to the more severely affected individuals who have the misfortune of having to see people like us on the sofa here.
I agree with you. In Japan, we developed step, therapies for IBS. It's published in the journal Gastroenterology. We have 3 steps. The first step is behavioral modification and pharmacotherapy to the gut. The second step includes some pharmacotherapies, and the third step is psychotherapies. So it depends on the mild, moderate, and severe IBS patients. So.
The other amazing thing about IBS, of course, is that when I talk to patients with IBS, I usually say there are triggers for your IBS. I say, one is diet and one is stress. And usually people who you're talking to will very much understand which one of those is the major trigger. Sometimes it's both, but some people say, oh, look, I can eat what I want, but if you put me in a stressful situation, I have major trouble. Other people will say, stress, no problem, but I've got to really watch what I eat. So that's not everyone is the same, which is part of the joy of medicine.
And just to finish off on that, and I know you addressed this with one of your questions after your presentation, Professor Gearry, but when you're given a choice as a patient to use either diet or take medication, do you, in your experience, find that patients do have a preference? Do they veer one way or the other? And I know they're all individuals, and you've just talked about that, but...
I think if you can offer with confidence a whole food that could help. So if you have a patient in front of you who is receptive to that, and if you have the data that backs that up, and it's the right person with the right symptoms that fit within a study, then clearly that is going to often be what people want. But there are always some people who just want the tablet. Just give me the tablet, doctor. Other people want the lifestyle change, and that's what we would advocate, because there may be benefits over and above just the health benefit that you're aiming for with, if it's Kiwifruit, there may be other benefits for Kiwifruit in doing that. And there may be downsides of a pharmacotherapy with regards to adverse side effects, for example, that need to be taken into account. So it is really an individual thing, but I think most of us would advocate the least invasive approach, whatever, the bottom-up approach, so that the dietary lifestyle change is made first before we get into drug interventions.
Can I just make an observation? We've talked a lot about the use of Kiwifruit for patients, but of course a lot of the discussion is how we can communicate the benefits of Kiwifruit to the general adult population. And I think it's incredibly important that we have the research going on how the changes in the microbiota are important, and how this modulates immunological responses. However, it's worth noting again that for a health claim, if you're trying to communicate the benefits in a claim on a product, one has to refer to the specific functions. It has to be a beneficial physiological effect. And in the area of digestive health, we're really talking about a fairly limited number of things that you can measure objectively, things like transit time, stool consistency, frequency of defecation, that kind of thing. So that's where the need is to demonstrate a specific functional effect. And the changes in volatile fatty acids or in immune response, that is very important from a mechanistic point of view, sorry. But it would regard it as supporting evidence, at least at the moment. And I know that EFSA, when they were discussing what evidence they needed to support a health claim for probiotics, they didn't actually like the idea of changes in the microbiological population towards more friendly bacteria, if you like. And so this is a huge scientific debate that's going on, but the fact is you have to measure the objective specific functional benefits, and these other things are supporting evidence of mechanisms. Richard, you might have a comment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is really just so complex, and if you ask different people around the world what was meant by a healthy gut, you may get a lot of very different answers to that. And the reason is because while we believe that microbial diversity is the right thing in the gastrointestinal tract, that's really through association studies primarily, which maybe don't always reflect causation. Yeah. And that's what I believe. I do believe that is true, but nonetheless, the gut is a complex organ, and now we've just thrown in this whole other thing, which is the microbiome on top of that, which is even more complex, really, with more species as well. So, I mean, I think the first thing we need to do as a scientific community is define what a healthy gut is. Yeah. But I think there's a long way to go to get there. Because if we can do that, and if it was accepted, then we could find ways of promoting a healthy gut, which actually I think would be the claim that you would like to make to the general population. But I don't think we're there yet. And I don't know what Giovanni and Shin think about that, but I don't think we're able to define that well enough, with enough endpoints that we can measure objectively in a really robust way to achieve that. But that's probably where we need to go.
That's research. Yep.
Talking about research, with all due respect to the eminent clinicians that are here, I would like to emphasize that research is also necessary, is still needed as to how to convey best the messages to the consumer. I already mentioned that there has been a collaborative project in the European Union called FLABEL, which identified important things relating to the information on nutrition labeling to consumers. And as I said, motivation was an important factor for the consumer to look at the label, and therefore education and all related aspects are important. The means of providing the information like front of pack labeling and health logos were mentioned as possible better ways of making that information understood to the consumer, but above all standardized presentation. Of course, in the case of claims, standardized presentation is not the norm. I mean, marketing people have their own ideas, different products, they have different messages to pass. But there, in the area of claims, I think information about how the message affects consumer purchasing power, purchasing behavior and use is still lacking. And now there is a big project that is going on for 4 years. It's going to come to the end in 2016, and it's looking exactly on the way that claims and symbols affect the behavior, purchasing behavior and consumer behavior of consumers. And it goes even further, recognizing that there is lack of valid methodology of how to measure that, because its aim also is to provide best practice recommendations for measuring these effects on the consumer. And the project is called Clean Ball.
Basil, thank you. And in fact, by doing so, you have brought us full circle in this discussion, gentlemen. Thank you very, very much. We have a couple of minutes left of this session, and I would love to throw it open. Media, I'll have a specific directive for you. At 4 o'clock, you will have your own access to our speakers, but if there are any other burning questions in the audience, our lovely ladies will distribute some microphones. I've had a wonderful business idea, thanks to your presentation, Professor Gearry, though, while we're waiting. That smart pill, I'm all about it. So I'm trying to potty train a 3-year-old. If you could make a tiny little version of the smart pill and it was an app on my iPhone, I would love you. What do you think?
I have 3 children and I'm past potty training, so I have,
So you don't care.
I have less motivation now, and I think it's a really important character building part of parenting to go through what you're doing now. So I congratulate you on your ongoing efforts in that regard.
Thank you so much. You are absolutely no help to me whatsoever. Do we have any burning questions? We do.
Hi, it's Jenny Reid here. I work for the Ministry for Primary Industries in New Zealand, and we're the food regulators here. It's a comment more than a question, and it is around that globally the regulation of health claims isn't consistent, and just to make a point that in New Zealand and Australia we do not regulate the wording of the claim, we regulate the food-health relationship. So it does give industry quite a lot of open field for creativity in how they actually word the claim, and hopefully a little more consumer friendly. So that's really a comment rather than a question. Thank you.
Thank you. Any response to that comment?
Just that I agree entirely with the way that the situation has been handled in New Zealand.
You agree entirely, yeah?
Giving that degree of flexibility, because you need to know the actual vocabulary that are used typically by consumers, and to try and match that vocabulary to communicate the message and match that to the scientific work that's going on. So I support what Jenny has just said.
You might think that I am biased, of course, but I'm a little bit more reserved about going that way, because what I have seen in the thousands of submissions of claims for approval makes me think that some reasonable flexibility should be allowed, but not the Wild West.
Thank you, Basil.
A comment I'll just make on that, if I could, is that I think that you either have a system where the gate's at the front and it's hard to get through the gate, and then it's all right, so you get your claim and the wording sorted out. If you have it the other way around, I think that's fine as well, but I suppose it needs to be well policed. So if you allow more flexibility, I think the policing has to go with that. So to me, I think that freedom is fine as long as it's policed, and that would be my only comment on that.
Thank you. We have time probably for one more question, if there is one lurking, or we might be done. Oh, we do. If we could get a microphone down to the right here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm from the United States. I just want to make comments about what's going on in the US. I'm a physician. I'm also a physician scientist. I think we're talking about kiwi fruit, and we're not talking about dietary supplement. We're definitely not talking about drug. And in the US, I think of the claim the tree nuts has been able to make is a good example for kiwi to look after. And tree nuts does have a allowable structural function claim that is the heart health. I think from what I learned today, kiwi fruit definitely is beneficial for gut health. There are benefits of confusion as to terminologies, but there are also benefit out of it. As a consumer, as a patient, and I can explain or I can give different definitions for gut health or digestive health. That actually make it easier as a consumer. I also have a comment. I heard from all the experts talking about fibers, talking about digestive enzymes in the kiwi fruit. But I do have a question. What makes the kiwi fruit different? What is the fiber in the kiwi fruit that is different from apple? What makes the sun gold kiwi yellow and how it makes the kiwi green green? Do we know what makes kiwi fruit, not an apple, not a banana?
So I'm really not the right person to answer that, but looking around the table, I'm probably the better of a bad bunch. I think Lindley would be the best person. I mean, at the end of the day, my understanding is the nutrient content of most fruit have been very well established to the points that they can be, and clearly we don't know what we don't know, but within the realms and through the US nutrition website and those sorts of places, my understanding is that we have a reasonably good understanding of what's in these various fruits. The question though is, can we then divide that down to understand what's different about fibre A versus fibre in one fruit versus fibre in another? And again, there may be others such as Lindley that you may wish to talk to after this session to really understand that in more detail.
Actually, in just a week ago, American Society of Nutrition meeting, there are quite a few fiber topic, and there is a clear now functional difference between dietary fiber, that is a fiber come in with natural food, versus supplemental fiber. And as to even dietary fibers, there are also clear evidence the fibers in apple is different from fibers from other sources. I'm pretty sure kiwi has its uniqueness. That's why we see the benefit and we see. I think it's very important to understand what is a kiwi, what is the sun gold, what is a green. I think that's a very good start. I think the consumers want to know why they would like to have kiwi other than other fruit, other than the vitamin C we know.
So I think a lot of those questions will be answered in tomorrow's session. Yep. We're looking at the effect of nutrition absorption of specific micronutrients in the context of the matrix of kiwi fruit, around viscosity, around these other aspects, which I think really just at the start of the genesis of really exploring how those things work. And I think the data that you hear tomorrow from John Munro and others will really give some insight into how kiwi fruit might be different from other fruits in that regard.
Just a brief comment. In the EU, of course, we can make fibre claims for content, either source or high. But when it comes to the functional beneficial effect of that fibre, you can't have a generic reference to dietary fibre. It's got to be very specific. And that's the way it is, because as Richard's already mentioned, all these different fibres have different structures, compositions, the whole lot. They have different physiological effects, and that's precisely the way that EFSA has decided to evaluate them.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Richardson. In fact, thank you to everyone. I saw Lindley nodding vigorously there, so I'm sure there'll be some animated discourse, and we'll hear more on fibre in far more detail, and a lot more during tomorrow's session.